Welcome back to the Big Life Podcast, where we explore what it really means to live with intention, lead with impact, and build a life that's as meaningful behind the scenes as it looks on.
Right on. And today's episode flips the script on what most of us were taught about leadership. Because for years, we believe that great leaders kept tight control, over outcomes, over people, over everything.
Robin, that's the old model of leadership, and it doesn't work anymore. What we realize is that the best leaders today don't lead through control. They lead, we like this word, through collaboration.
I love that word. And so we're going to unpack what that shift really looks like today, folks. How to replace fear with trust, and command with connection, and control with confidence.
And here's the beauty of what we're going to talk about, Robin and audience. Whether you lead a company, a team, or a family, this conversation will help you lead with more freedom and less friction.
I like it.
Welcome to the Big Life Podcast, where dreams aren't just imagined, they're built brick by brick, belief by belief. Hosted by Neal Oates Jr. and Robin Lewis, this show is your invitation to discover your amazing capabilities, invest in your growth, and unleash your potential in ways you've only dreamed of. Join Neal and Robin as they dive deep into stories, insights, and tools designed to inspire you to show up big, live intentionally, and give yourself away for the betterment of those around you. Get ready to rise to what you're truly worthy of. The Big Life starts now.
So, Robin, control used to be a badge of honor, right? If you could manage every detail, every person, every problem, you were seen as competent, as powerful, and organized. But the problem is that kind of leadership usually creates dependence, not development. And when everything has to run through you or has to run through us, we don't have a team. We have a group of assistants waiting for your next instruction.
Exactly, man. It's so true. I think about that phrase that if you want something done right, do it yourself, right?
I thought you were going somewhere else, Robin.
Yeah.
But if you want something done right, do it yourself.
Do it yourself. How many times have I thought that? We were raised on that idea. But here's the thing. If you really believe it, you'll never build anything bigger than your own capacity, right? What's funny is that most of us don't even realize how much control we're holding on to. I know I didn't. It's subtle. It's rewriting someone's work to make it sound better. You ever done that, Neal? It's not delegating because you can do it faster. If you do it, you can get it done faster. Does that sound familiar, listeners? It's correcting someone in public when they don't do it your way. Those are the subtle things where it shows up.
Robin, I can tell you we're already only a couple minutes in and you're hitting us left, right, jab, uppercut. And so here's what that old model of leadership is. It's all about ego management disguised as excellence. And even as I think about that, and I was doing my notes in preparation, I had to ask myself, does my ego need to be managed? And am I disguising this bad thing as excellence? That's why we do it this way. But here's what I have learned through that self-reflection. When I lead my team through control, my team learns one of two things. Either I can't win or I'll wait until I am told. Right. And so my employees, my team, my family, they say, no matter what I do, I can't win. Right. Neal's just going to be on my case. Or, man, I'll just wait until Neal tells me to do something. And here's the dangerous part as a driver, Robin. They both destroy initiative.
Yes.
Right. I once coached a business owner who couldn't understand why his leadership team wasn't proactive. But when we looked closer, every time someone took initiative, he overrode it or overrided it. Right. He didn't mean any harm. He just wanted to protect the standard. And you and I, we're always talking about the standard and setting the expectations. But in doing that, he trained everyone around him to stop thinking. So his goal was protect the standard. What was heard and received was stop thinking. He's going to do it for us anyway. He's going to tell us the right way to get the job done.
Yeah. And that is common. I see that, especially amongst high performers. You know, they've built their success through personal discipline and they've kind of done it, you know? And so control feels safe because it protects the brand, it protects the image, it protects the results. And you know, our listeners, you might be listening to us today and you're hearing this, and I want you to consider it. You might be doing this without even realizing it. Most people who do don't realize that they're doing it. But what it really protects is our comfort zone. That's really what we're protecting. Because as we let go and let others, that's a little uncomfortable, right? We're taking a little risk. And let's talk about what's beneath control, Neal, because it's really just about systems or strategy. I believe that it's often rooted in fear. Do you agree?
Here you go with that bad word, right? I'm glad you shared that and not me, Robin, but absolutely fear of failure, fear of being judged, fear that if we let go, it all falls apart, right? A lot of leaders don't realize how much of their drive for excellence is actually not a drive for excellence. It's anxiety in disguise. And this is twice that I've had to talk about something being disguised, whether it was my ego management or this drive for excellence is really a disguise for something much more dangerous, anxiety. Right. So control becomes a coping mechanism. And we know that when we start hearing the words coping mechanism, it means that there are some dangers around. Right. We micromanage when we don't trust the outcome or we don't trust the people. But sometimes we don't even trust ourselves to handle disappointment if things don't go as planned, Robin. And I know I have been there. So that's why I'm comfortable sharing that with the audience today.
It's powerful and it's deep and it's human. I think we all have stories that shaped how we lead. You know, maybe growing up, we learned that love was tied to performance,
Yeah.
right, Neal? Or that mistakes weren't safe. You heard me. I've shared right here with you on this podcast how that was something that, as an adult, my daughter, as an adult, I wanted to make sure and correct that because I think I may have created that. You know, that mistakes weren't safe growing up by how I treated mistakes that she may have made. And so we bring that into leadership. That's the reality. But collaboration requires something that control never does, and that's vulnerability. And so collaboration requires being vulnerable.
And immediately, Robin, for our audience, for our listeners, I can tell you, as those who are striving, chasing after this big life, the idea of being vulnerable in our pursuit is something that we're going to have to work on in those dark moments, right? When no one else is watching. And that's the truth. Collaboration requires vulnerability. Collaboration says, I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And we often seek to not be the smartest person in the room. But here's what control says. Control says, I can't afford not to be the smartest person in the room. So we have one that is rooted in humility, and the other is oftentimes rooted in insecurity.
Yeah, that's a truth bomb right there. So let's talk about how can we move from control to collaboration. It's a very good question. And I believe that it starts with redefining what leadership even is. Leadership is no longer about command. I'm not saying anything new there. I think in our society is recognizing that. It's about connection. The best leaders today are facilitators, not dictators. Right,
Robin,
Neal?
Robin, even though you were saying it's nothing new, we still need to be reminded, right?
Yeah,
I often
exactly.
say that if God knew that he needed to remind us over and over and over about these big things that were right in front of our face, how often do we as strivers, achievers, leaders need to be reminded? And so what you just said was absolutely correct. And so here's what collaboration doesn't mean. Collaboration doesn't mean chaos. It means co-creation. I know many of us like, well, if we bring two people in, then we got to deal with two personalities or three personalities and voices and ideas. That's chaotic. And so here's what collaboration is. It doesn't mean chaos. It means co-creation. It means you see the vision clearly enough that people can bring their unique brilliance to it. So that requires more of us as leaders. When you trust your team to solve problems, you unlock their creativity. And I believe we're living in a creative age, more creative age than we ever have, where there's a need for creativity. The problem is we have stifled that creativity. So as leaders, as owners, as employers, when you unlock, or let me say, when you include them in the decisions, your team in those decisions, we tap into ownership. And ownership really moves the team, moves individuals further ahead. I remember when I shifted my own coaching model. Early on, I felt like I had to teach everything. But now I see myself as a guide. And I think that's a great place to be. I bring structure, but the breakthroughs come from the clients discovering their own strength and strategy. And even in coaching, that's what I would consider collaboration in motion.
That's such a good example, actually. It makes me think about parenting. I think it's the same with parenting as well. You can control behavior, but that doesn't actually teach character, right? If we're just controlling what they do and we're just dictating and so on as parents. But collaboration develops ownership, in in our children, in our family, and ownership is really what lasts. It's about knowing the why, and it's about owning it and bringing your art and your way of making that.
Robin, I want to pause right here. So we're talking about not like controlling the behavior, but building character. As new grandpa, right, coming up on a year, could you talk about just a little about this? So I have a 17-year-old, right? And so there are times when, as parents, well, first, as leaders here, we often think about leading an organization, but maybe the most important leadership that we're ever going to do is in the home, right? Because that's going to impact generations, it's going to impact families. And so I look at when I have led as a father through control and not collaboration. Like, son, do this. And him not buying in to the decision, right? Him saying, okay, I'll do it, but that doesn't change my character. So if you would just pause right there, on that family side, we're talking about our kids because your daughter is further in age than mine. So talk about when you've went with well, let's focus on the control piece. And then you've mentioned on this podcast or on a previous episode, now it's the character building phase and it's not all about control.
Yeah, I mean, it's talking about the why. It's setting the clear standards. It's having values, family values. And so it's similar to what we would do in a company, Neil. But I think bringing that to the family as well. So we used to say things like, well, do this or do that. Well, why? Because I said so. Right? Like, I am the authority. And that doesn't go a long way. My daughter is not going to buy into that. If you really think about it, I wouldn't buy into it when people came to me with that sort of approach. Right? And so it's a similar thing, I think. We're just bringing the same things that we use in the business world, and we're bringing that into the family. I'm not saying to you folks that I did this all well. I'm looking back and realize I could have done this better, actually. And what that does is that you are creating ownership, and you are allowing your children, in my case, in our case, my daughter, to develop her own character and to understand and live out the values and so on. Right? Make sense?
Absolutely. And so here's what I love, Robin. So even as you're talking about in the family space, I see an evolution of leadership, right? So we go from told you I decide to now we create. And I've seen some things even with my son who is 17. When I've decided, I've seen the outcome. When we have created a plan, I've seen the outcome. And there's no question which one got the better long-term result because it did result in a change in character and a change in willingness to accept ownership and to have initiative for the next thing. So I didn't have to sit here and say, well, do this. He's like, no, I've already done it because I know that we are creating this thing. So I just wanted to pause there as we talk about family. I know a lot of times we as strivers, as achievers, we can get stuck on business, entrepreneurship, finances, and the family idea of the big life sort of gets left behind.
Yes, good point. And that's exactly where it shouldn't. So I'm glad we stopped and paused there for a moment. That's where the focus should be, really, right? That's where it starts. That's our legacy. That's our main legacy. So Neal, can we get practical here as we try to
Absolutely.
do each week? What's the ROI of collaboration? I'm sure our leaders are asking that question. Like, does this really work in the business world, in terms of me getting a return on my investment?
And that's why we're here. We're not just talking to talk. We're not just grabbing ideas out of the sky. Let's look at the numbers because the numbers really are undeniable. And so I think this is a great place for us to start putting the tire to the pavement. Studies show that teams with high trust and collaboration outperform low trust teams by up to 50%. So it's just a good business practice, right? It's just good for the bottom line. That's one. So the performance. Then we start looking at employee retention. And as owners, as employers, we know that it's always cheaper, it's always less expensive to keep those that we've already trained and they know our system and our culture. So employee retention skyrockets, innovation doubles, and who does not need this idea of innovation doubling, especially in these times that we're in? But here's what's most exciting to me, Robin, is that the studies show that burnout drops. And here's why. Because responsibility is shared. If I have to carry the weight of doing this thing myself and this project or this product rollout, then I might get burned out. But when we look at this collaboration and we share responsibility, it drastically cuts down in the amount of burnout. And that is going to increase the energy that we have to innovate. It means that we're going to stay longer and we're going to give ideas.
Wow. I mean, so to our listeners, to our leaders that are tuning in with us today, if we can show you a way that you can increase performance, that you can lower turnover, so you're increasing employee retention, you're getting more creativity, more innovation, and people are engaged. Would you want to know how to do that? I mean, those are key indicators. And so thanks for sharing. And I think it's important to say it's not just about the money, right?
Right.
We're talking here about it's creating a culture, right? A collaborative environment becomes magnetic, and talented people want to be there. And the talented people who are there want to stay there. And they're proud of it. And they tell others. And that builds a momentum. So now you got something that's now building, creating, and growing on its own.
And that's where we want to be, because control, it might produce short-term compliance like, yeah, I'll do it because he said, because she said, but collaboration builds long-term commitment. And we know that once we have that long-term commitment, that's what scales. That's what gets that momentum going. And now all of a sudden we can't be stopped. We're moving right along. So now, Robin, I want to paint a picture. In a control-based environment, the leader talks 80% of the time in meetings, right? Most of us have been in those control-based environments. Decisions, they flow from the top down, and mistakes are hidden because people are afraid. But in a collaborative environment, questions drive the conversation, where the leader comes in and say, well, here's what I was thinking. Do we have any ideas? Or what ideas or challenges are we having? Ideas are shared. And then mistakes. And here's what I love about these mistakes in a collaborative environment. They become data, right? Like, hey, we made a mistake. What can we learn from this? And then from that data, mutual accountability instead of fear-based performance is the result. And I think all of that is powerful as we move from control to collaboration.
And it's so true. And I was smiling as you were talking about that, because I definitely have been, you were saying many of us have been in those meetings. Well, I have been the leader doing 80% of the talking. I have led those meetings, embarrassed to say. But I love what you're sharing. And I want to, I made some notes here. Here are some signs that you're leading with collaboration. You hear phrases like, we decided, instead of Neil said or Robin said, right? We decided. People bring ideas without even being asked. That's a good sign that you have a collaborative environment there. People feel free and encouraged and are excited to bring ideas. There's laughter and energy in the room, even during problem solving, right? So even when we're solving problems, there's energy. And then the last one I'll share is the team measures success by collective wins, not individual scorecards. Yeah, you see these signs, you're leading with collaboration.
And that's fantastic. So you're looking at the signs, but the leaders are going to say, well, how do we know when we've achieved? Right. So we see the signs and we might say, all right, I think we're starting to build something here. But here's what we would consider the litmus test for any leader. If you step away for 2 weeks, does everything stop? I know leaders are listening right now and they're like, Neal, I know you all talk about the big life. My idea of the big life is taking a vacation for 3 days. And now I come in and say the litmus test is, if you step away for 2 weeks, does everything stop? If it does, you are managing by control. If it runs smoothly, you're leading through collaboration. And so now I'm not telling you, Robin's not telling you to step away from your business for 2 weeks and watch the thing go down. But the goal is for us to get to a place where we are leading through collaboration so we can build the big life in all areas of our lives.
Yeah, it's so true. That's what leadership is all about, right? And so, Neal, let's be real with our listeners. Collaboration is not easy, right? So let's talk about some of the things that get in the way. What do you think gets in the way of collaboration?
For me, there are 3 things that come to my mind, and none of them, because we were talking about those obstacles, those barriers, those hurdles to collaboration. The first one is, and we mentioned this earlier, ego. So for me, the 3 are ego, insecurity, and impatience. So ego says, I know best, right? It's my way or the highway. Insecurity says they might outshine me. Like if I give them a chance, then they become the gal or the guy. And then impatience says exactly what you alluded to earlier. It's faster if I just do it myself.
That's the trifecta right there, right? Collaboration is slower at first because it requires alignment. But once people understand expectations and they trust each other, it moves a lot faster and healthier, right? But those are the things to look out for. And yeah, hey, listen, it is going to take a little time to get that alignment. But once we do, then it starts to move faster as well. So that's what I want our listeners to hear.
And you're absolutely right, Robin. And of course, I'm trying to find the correlation to what you're talking about, finding that alignment. It's like building muscle. The resistance at the beginning is what creates strength later. We often hear that if there is no tension, no friction, then there won't be any growth. So I'm thinking of building this culture, building this environment, and this alignment is going to be slow but necessary in the beginning so that we can have a strong team, a strong collaborative team later on. And so that's exciting for me to hear.
That's a great illustration. I like it. Yeah, we can see that. We know that. Right? That's a good comparison there. So Neal, let's talk practical strategy now, as we like to do that. How can someone that's listening, how can our listeners, whether they're a CEO or a team leader or a parent, how can they start creating a collaborative culture, a collaborative approach and environment?
So you and I, we like to make things as simple and clear as possible. So there's a 5-step roadmap that I often give my clients, and we're going to make it simple. So first, start with clarity. I believe that we must start with clarity. Collaboration thrives within clear boundaries. Define the mission, values, and the desired outcomes first. So start with clarity. Then we're going to invite contribution early, like from the onset. Don't just ask for input at the end. Bring people in when ideas are forming. So we're going to start with clarity, invite contribution early. Then we move to this next piece, reward transparency, ladies and gentlemen. Make it safe for people to speak up, disagree, or to fail forward. Robin, I know as a leader, you are all about failing forward. You think that when we fail, we have an opportunity to learn if we go in and assess that failing forward. And then here is a big one, these last two. Share wins publicly. Recognition builds momentum. And the most important one, number 5 for me as a leader, is to model the behavior. What gets modeled gets followed. If you want openness, be open. If you want trust, give trust first. Those are going to be the 5 steps for me and in my belief that's really going to create a collaborative environment.
Neal, I love those. First of all, this probably goes without saying, but can we have that? I'm going to put you on the spot now and ask you, can we have that 5-step roadmap in the show notes for our listeners?
Absolutely. That's easy to do. Consider it done.
I think that's a good guideline for us to use. I'm going into an environment to sort of help with an organization here next week. And what a good framework that you've given there that we can use. That's a framework that we can use in any type of an environment where we're looking to try and create a collaboration, where we're looking to lead for the organization to be sustainable, to last. And so, yes, thank you. I think our listeners will appreciate that. Perhaps they were trying to take notes and couldn't capture that all. And I want to add one to that, Neal. And I would say to add, be intentional about language. So phrases like, what do you think? John Maxwell talks about asking questions, right? And so what we want to get better at is asking questions. How can we improve this? So you're encouraging people to come and bring their ideas. And it sends a message that collaboration is expected. It's not optional. And the reason that we want to do that is because collaboration is going to make whatever it is that we're doing better as well, in addition to creating ownership. The different ideas that come together make your idea even that much better. Right, Neal?
Absolutely. And so when I hear this, I always go back to one of the things that one of my mentors would share with me. It says that whenever you bring me a problem, I need you to bring me 3 solutions. And one of those solutions must directly include your involvement. So bring me the problem, but bring me 3 solutions. And one of them must include your direct involvement. And so then it was all of a sudden, people started bringing fewer problems, right? Because oftentimes I knew that, or they knew that the solution that I was going to suggest or ask them to implement first was going to be the one that included their direct involvement. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, so he is giving me permission. He's giving me the opportunity to come in and solve a problem without asking his permission or even getting his input. And then they would make me aware afterwards. Now, this is, of course, if it wasn't a huge issue or something that was affecting the team or the organization.
That's a great example. Well done. So let's shift gears for just a moment here, Neal. How does this show up personally? Because collaboration isn't just for teams, right? It's for relationships, it's for marriages, it's for friendships. And so how does this show up in those types of relationships?
So I'll just share my opinion. In personal life, control often shows up as needing to be right. And so this is coming from someone who has lots of personal relationships. And many times I found myself being that person that needs to be right. But here's how collaboration shows up: as choosing to understand. And our mentor always talks about seek to understand before you seek to be understood. It's learning to listen without defending. That's a big one. To create space for others to bring their truth without fear. And so the reason I feel I'm going to say qualified to say those things, it's because I have been on the other side of those decisions or those emotions where I was not creating space for others. I did instill fear because I would chop their heads off for bringing ideas up, right? And so that's leadership too, the leadership of emotional maturity. Unfortunately, many of us who are listening to this podcast or who are hosting this podcast, we didn't gain this emotional maturity until after some missteps and mistakes had been made. And we had to make intentional decisions to say, is this going to be data or is this going to be something that holds us back and keeps us from moving forward?
Yeah, it's funny, that's when I look at my own life, Neil, that's an area where I had to become aware that I did better at this in the business world
Mhm.
than I did with my personal, with my family, specifically, where I wanted to be right, and I would always come across that way, and so that's something that I had to make a shift on, and I still have to be very intentional about it sometimes, to be honest with you,
Mhm.
and that's where the big life really happens when we stop needing to dominate conversations and start co-authoring them, right? Collaborating with conversations. That's where the big life really happens.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to interject right here. Everything Robin and I are talking about, we have to implement in our daily lives, in our relationships before we record episodes. We're having to not control, we're having to collaborate. We're having to ask ideas and disagree and not need to be right. And to make sure that if we open up, then there is room to co-create without fear, to encourage and to be or to have the room for initiative. And so that's why I laugh and smile if you're watching. You're like, well, why is Neil always laughing when Robin's talking? It's because I'm thinking of things that I have done or my experience. And a lot of times it's been a few minutes before we started recording the episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very real thing. So when you heard Robin in the intro say that, Neil, does that sound familiar? It's because Robin and I have just experienced those things. And so here's what I want to share with the leaders. The leaders who make this shift often describe the same transformation, Robin. And I think this is encouraging because we're going to sit back and say, well, what if I do it and it works or it doesn't work? And I'm the only one who's going through this. But here's what we hear from most of the leaders who make this shift. They describe the same transformation. Less stress. Yes, sign me up for that. More innovation. Where can I get some? Deeper relationships. I need that in my life. Right. So they stop being bottlenecks and start being builders. We as leaders, we can be the restriction. We can be the bottleneck on our entire organization. But when we start being builders, great things happen. And you mentioned that's what scales.
Yeah, right on. And you said earlier, in your coaching, you went from being the teaching to the guide. So they go from being the hero of the story to being the guide who helps others become heroes. That's collaboration at its core. That's where we get multiplication instead of domination. And what we're after is multiplication, right? So that's where that's how multiplication comes in.
Robin, so you mentioned being the guide that helps others become the hero. And we talk about having to manage and check that ego, sir. How hard is that? Right? Even with the people who have the right hearts and the good intention, it can be a challenge where it's not about me, it's about we, where I might be the guide that gets the person to the top of the mountain and no one may ever know my name. They
Yeah,
might not know it was my idea. This goes back to a conversation that you and I were having before we hit record.
yeah,
And so that is a huge thing. And so here's what I want to say, that if you take nothing else away from this conversation, I'm going to ask and implore that you remember this. Control creates compliance, right? And sometimes that's what we're looking for. That's our leadership style. That's all we want. But collaboration creates commitment. And that allows a new level, a different level of things, growth, of opportunities to be birthed.
Right on. And the future belongs to the leaders who know how to connect. The future belongs to those leaders who know how to empower and to co-create. That's the one. That's the leader that's going to be set apart. That's the organization that's going to be set apart, where you have leaders who know how to connect, to empower, and to co-create.
And Robin, that's the heartbeat of the big life. That's why we're here. And so, as we talked about leadership and moving from control to collaboration, that's what really on the leadership side, on the business side, on the family side, on the personal side, relationally, that's what the heartbeat of the big life is.
Right on. What a great episode. You know, Neal, as you were talking about moving from control to collaboration, I kept thinking about what happens next. Right? Once you've made that mindset shift, what happens next? Right?
So that's absolutely correct, because that's where leaders often say, okay, I believe it. Now, how do I build it? Right. And I think that's where, if we aren't careful, we could leave people there. Hey, yes, we're all on board. Collaboration, we want it. And they're searching and they're looking, and there's nothing else.
Exactly right. And for our listeners, that's what we're going to be diving into next week. So I want you to choose in. We're going to tune in, because we're going to talk about how to stop being the bottleneck in your business. We'll talk about moving from hero to architect, from fast growth to sustainable growth. And we're going to talk about how to design leadership that lasts.
Why am I not surprised? And ladies and gentlemen, this was Robin's idea, because the thought process was, okay, we're here. Where do we go next? And so here's what I'm going to encourage you. If today challenged your mindset, next week is going to stretch your structure. So first, the mindset has been opened and you're saying, I believe it. Robin, Neal, don't leave me. We're not going to leave you. We're going to stretch your structure next week. So we're going to be excited about what we have to share.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. So we challenge the mindset, and we're going to stretch the structure. So don't miss it, folks. It's all about building the systems and clarity that frees your team to grow. And so as we wind down today, if this episode challenged you, we want you to share it with someone in leadership who's ready to make that shift from control to collaboration. That, you know, you can help get the message out and add value to others, right? That's the idea. If this added value to you, share it with somebody else. Conversations like this are where transformation starts. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, leave a review, and connect with us online. We'd love to hear how you're implementing these ideas. Please, we're looking for that feedback. How is this? How are you implementing this in your world? And until the next time, just remember that God loves you, we love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And until the next time we see each other, remember, we're right there with you. Peace.
Peace.